Look at all my makings and everything organised. There's the kitchen, there's the space at FTR.
Yeah, I'm not getting any. I'm not getting anything on that monitor. No, it's too pale.
Yeah.
Hold it. I just want to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Roll.
Okay. So the Mafia has basically controlled New York sort of like in one way or another, you know, like through the Italian sort of connection and through the whole sort of layout of disposal, garbage disposal, fish markets, you know, yada yada, right? Giuliani came in, of course, and he had this no tolerance sort of process, but he'd been he was actually a attorney. He was the main guy, the general. What do you call him? The prosecutor, the main prosecutor, and went after the Mafia. No one had actually been able to tackle them before. And they got them with this thing called the RICO law, which was Johnny Rico, which was the idea. It was actually you know, they couldn't find any way to actually sort of knob them, you know. So they figured out this kind of conspiracy thing, so that they actually determined a conspiracy, and that was a conspiracy to defraud or to manipulate or to do business. Then they can get them on that. And the RICO law basically changed the whole sort of relationship, you know, between, and it came with the Gottis and all that sort of stuff, you know, got Gambinos, the Gottis and whatever. When I came to New York, we moved into a building downtown where we got the lease, and we got, I think, a 3-year lease at that point, and it was an abandoned it was an empty building pretty much in a large complex in the Washington Markets district, which had been the area where it was essentially the kind of import sort of spot for spices, originally for spices coming off the boats. So it was the southwest corner next to where the World Trade Center is now, but it was all a kind of market area. And the other major kind of elements of that was the dairy industry, butter, cheese, and on the other side, the financial district was the fish market. So that was the kind of configuration of downtown New York, with Chinatown sitting next to it, on the point in a sense, and then with the Wall Street and all that sort of stuff down the bottom, you know, as the old city in a sense. So the area that we were moving into had been a market area, the Washington markets. There was virtually no one living there when I first went there. And the first place I moved into was Richard Serra's place. And he had this huge loft, and he was moving to a bigger place, and I mean, he had 5,000 square feet. It was massive. And the deal that he said I could live in his place if I moved all the steel out. And that was involved moving, you know, the elevator had long gone, and he'd moved up, you know, about 8 tons of metal into this fucking place. So I had to kind of get rid of that. That was the job, the task. As I was doing that, they were building the World Trade Center and these apartment buildings around us. One of which, when I was throwing, I used to just throw the garbage bags off the top of the place, you know, and just drop them on the street, you know, in a pile, you know, from 6 flights. And as I was throwing the garbage out one night, you know, a body landed opposite in the empty lot, which now is the park down there. And, you know, it's all kind of gentrified, and there's all lawyers living there, and most of the artists have been driven out right now. And a lot of them went to Williamsburg. So it was that kind of, in the 70s, it was the developing sort of place. So there was a lot of small industry, markets, all that sort of stuff had gone. Coffee houses, De Niro has, you know, bought one of them, that kind of thing. And various kind of mafia guys, you know, lieutenants and everything else, had essentially been in the waste removal business, to put it sort of in its, you know, environmental term. And they had names like, in fact, our landlord had a company called the Environmental Waste Corporation. Environmental being kind of like a giveaway word for, pretending that they're actually doing something other than just dragging garbage out to landfills, in Long Island or wherever, In the process of that, all the profits of all that they were just buying buildings. Essentially, they owned this particular guy who was our capo, or our landlord, was a guy called Alfonso Ponti. And Alfonso, I never actually met Alfonso. I met his son, who, got one of those law degrees, that on toilet paper that you buy from a Long Island university that nobody knows exists. But they kind of ran this building, and they had a kind of lease on it. There was nothing happening in the real estate thing was down the drain. Everybody had dumped buildings in New York on a radical basis because, to insure them, to run them, to put hot water in, to do all that sort of stuff cost too much and wasn't worth it. So what they did was give them to artists with leases, 10-year, 5-year, 15-year at the max probably, leases. So the artists came in, replumbed them, divided the floors up, turned them into amazing spaces, really. I mean, they had oak floors, a lot of these places hadn't been touched in maybe 15, 20 years since the kind of markets had run out. So essentially they were, looking at them as a kind of short-term sort of development process. And all the artists, of course, who had some sort of trade behind them anyway, and you had to have a trade in sort of New York in some way or another. You became a plumber or an electrician, or, you scraped walls, or you painted, or you did something, you moved sheetrock. There was a hierarchy, through the sort of process. So anyone who was coming into that kind of situation ended up in some way or another in the building development business, by default. Then, of course, space got tight in New York, and and it got more expensive, and Soho, which had happened before that, like the 5 to 10 years before that, had now become filled up, and now they were forcing the artists out, and they were becoming boutiques, and the on the street stuff and the cobblestone streets were all, and that was actually jammed between Little Italy. So that was the prime spot. The next spot was Tribeca, which is what we're talking about, which was the triangle below Canal on the west side, which TRIBECCA, that's how it reads. And Soho, of course, was south of Houston, and NoHo north of Houston, and all these little areas that became, like sort of residential districts that had very little residential in them before that, sort of developed. So we were in this building with, I think, a 3 to 5, might have been a 5-year lease. I can't remember exactly the details, but our lease, we came in a year after the other people, 4 places in the building, and the building next door to us, which was quite a large loft area, about 3,000 to 4,000 square foot of floor. This was Betty Gordon had bought this place, filmmaker, or bought the lease on it, or shared the lease on it. And in the process of that, basically they suddenly, the building was developed, suddenly it was worth a lot of money, and they wanted everybody out. These guys had burnt buildings down. I mean, they did the other thing that happened at that point was a heritage relationship that they were worried about. If it was turned into a heritage thing, they couldn't do anything with it. So, similar to what's been occurring in Perth to some extent. So they basically would come in and either burn the building down, in which case, then the heritage thing is worth nothing, or they would pull it down before the law went through, and they would be tipped off by guys in council and stuff like that, and everyone was getting paid off. So essentially they wanted us out. We were holding on a lease, we got a lawyer, and then they brought in a law to protect artists called the grandfather law. If you'd been there for more than 3 years, you had the right to actually negotiate your way out of the building, or use it as a house, to actually, to continue a lease. And they were quite far-reaching, revolutionary kind of landlord laws. I mean, there's always been a war in the landlord kind of game in New York, but New York has got a better landlord relationship, say, than we have in Australia. So they wanted us out. And essentially the building hadn't been serviced, looked after, except by the tenants themselves for, 20 years, I suppose, roughly. So all the services, all the piping, all the risers for the gas, the electricity, all were put in by us. So there was an infrastructure in there worth, quite a bit of money, besides the thing. So then the grandfather law came in and we had the right to stay, unless there was something radically wrong with the building. Then the heritage law came in and they couldn't actually tear the building down. And they wanted to get us out. What had happened over the road was they'd torn that building down 20 years before, right? So they'd been sitting on it for 20 years, and there were various people, and then they sold to American Express for $40 million, and they, in 6 months, American Express built a 50-story building right in front of us, with our river views and all that sort of stuff. Whack. So these guys then said, well, and all that sort of rebuilding of the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center kind of went bankrupt, really. The Port Authority, they built it, then, it was all occupied, then, suddenly there was this kind of total, New York was going bankrupt in the 70s, everything kind of folding. But by the 80s, of course, everyone wanted to land back, the World Trade Center and all that sort of stuff refilled up, and they started buying buildings around us. American Express, all the kind of the build-up of the banking, stockbroking kind of scene, Smith Barney, every insurance company you can imagine. And so American Express comes in, builds a building opposite us. These guys now want to sell this building that we're sitting on, which is worth about 40 million in terms of space, of the whole block, which they own, pretty much all these abandoned buildings. In the end, basically the leases all ran out on the building next door to us in the one day, and they had everyone out within 24 hours. I went back, I used to go into the building and strip all the fixtures and build my building out of their building. Like light fixtures, plumbing, there was whole dark rooms in there, there was entire artists. So the dinners were still on the table. There was absolutely like everything left there that all these people were living in. And they just removed them, within a day or 2 days. And they did that with these guys called Mr. Smith and this other guy. So the guy that kind of ran around and checked to see who was living in the buildings and what was going on was this kind of Spanish dude, and he was kind of like right at the bottom end of the rung and worked for the Environmental Waste Corporation. We never saw anyone from the Waste Corporation in those days, before the lawyers kind of got involved and everything. They wanted us out. They gave us, I think, 2 weeks to get out. We got a lawyer, we forced them to sort of negotiate, and then the grandfather law came in. We held out long enough to get the grandfather law. All the people next door didn't. And they went. Their lease was up a year before ours, and that's what fucked them up. And, so I built dark rooms. I went in and took all the light fixtures out. So I used to go through the wall, up onto the roof, over into their building, and strip it of like useful kind of elements. What they did was go in with their guys, Mr. Smith and his gang. Let's call him Mr. Smith. He's a big fat guy. I don't know whether he was Italian or what, but him and another guy. And then they'd get the Spanish workers and stuff to come in, and they'd chop holes in the roof with axes, right? Through the tar roof, the tar wood roof structures. All these buildings are built in, somewhere in the 19th century, early 19th century, you'd imagine, somewhere in the mid to 1850s on, And they were beautifully built buildings, brick and oak floors. Not as good as Soho, that built all those buildings out of steel, out of cast iron, and similar idea, but Soho was built in they were all sweatshops and stuff like that in Soho, whereas they were all cheese warehouses and butter warehouses, and a lot of them had cork lining and things like that. So they were kind of semi-refrigerated, or you put a block of ice in there and it kept everything cool. Anyway, so to destroy the building, so they emptied this building out. It was heritage, so they couldn't touch it unless it fell apart. So they came in the middle of the night with bloody axes and chopped holes in the roof. which meant the water poured through into the floors, into these beautiful oak floors, and all the oak floors would swell and then pop, and then the next floor would go, and it would proceed through the building like that. And then the walls would wear out and the pointing and all that, and the things would start falling down. So we had these crumbling buildings around us. In our process of the thing, after we got into a major dispute with them, for instance, they came in the middle of the night with a gang and chopped a hole through the sewer pipe at the bottom of our building, so the sewerage was just pouring into the basement. It took me a couple of days to figure that out. We had to go down there and re-sewer the bloody thing, so that, we were working, in opposition to them. And I was going into, by the time this happened, there were only 3 people left in our building. All the rest had been gotten rid of by the fact that their leases had run out earlier than this grandfather law that saved artists and gave artists the right to continue to live there. So basically what happened was then they started to harass the shit out of us, right? And they'd been burning buildings down or coming in with the big ball and chain thing, a crane with a huge ball on it. In one instance, they had this beautiful building that was a bit like the Flatiron building that was built on a corner. So it was actually, the thickness was only about a foot wide at the corner, and then it went to about sort of 20 metres at the other end, so it was a building shaped like a triangle on the end of a corner of a block. And they were tipped off that it was the heritage, they were going to heritage this building. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, they came in with this huge ball and a crane and just smashed it into the side of the building. There were people living in the building at the time, so they just scattered and got out. I mean, there was a war. That's the kind of war thing. You never knew. Other times, they would just throw, burning stuff in there and whatnot. So essentially, I put in smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, we kind of worked up against them. And the Spanish guy was the only connection I had to the Environmental Corporation. I kept, I heard of Mr. Smith, I talked to him on the phone occasionally, but basically I dealt with this Spanish dude. And he kind of tipped us off when things were happening because, he was actually, sort of morally working for us, while he was working for the Corp. And this Capo Ponte, he owned at that stage, I think, about 45 buildings in Tribeca, which, well, in the end, they're worth, say, minimum of 3 million a building, so we're looking at a serious amount of money here. He had interest in the fish thing. He had a restaurant around the corner, Ponte's, where the Mafia, limousines pulled up. You never knew who it was. They had El Teddy's, which is now a Mexican joint, but, and they had pictures of Frank Sinatra up and the sort of thing, and, Ernest Borgnine and the people like that, used to go there for dinner. De Niro bought the building next door to us, which was a coffee house, and I can't remember what he paid for it. I think 3 million at that stage, something like that. And he turned it into Tribeca Film Centre. Now, he bought the block next door, which was empty, and he was going to build a hotel on that. That was his kind of long-term plan. So he turned this thing into a series of edit rooms and production houses for Tribeca and a film school and a whole lot of things. And he was going to build this thing. So he was actually part of the community and really supportive of everything. Until such time as the heritage law came in and they wouldn't let him build a hotel. And then he turned against us and went after us, like, massively. But by that time it was too late. The grandfather heritage laws went through because he'd offered support in the beginning, and then when he realised he was going to be done out of 50 million, he bailed as well. So then he sort of moved sides. And the Italian connection there, of course, because Scorsese, as his mate, and, they lived in the building around the corner of the bank building with, he had the top floor of that. But the other actor who I used to talk to down a lot on the park, who's fantastic. I remember middle block here. Who we got? Did Bad Lieutenant.
Abe Ferrara.
No, he was directing him. Yeah, but he was another kind of minor player. He was the one who was actually kind of the independent filmmaker at the bottom of the list there. But who backed Ferrara is the issue there, and that was and he did the piano, of course, acting we're talking about. Who am I talking
Harvey
about?
Keitel.
Harvey. So Harvey lived in the neighbourhood, and he was of the neighbourhood, whereas Scorsese and not Scorsese was in the neighbourhood, but De Niro, you know, was above the neighbourhood, and you know, De Niro's career went up there, and Harvey's kind of wasn't up there so much, you know. And he was doing all these risky independent things like The Bad Lieutenant and the Ferrara things, and you know, various bits and pieces like that. Anyway, so we lost sort of De Niro as a supporter, but he'd already kind of put the nail in the coffin for the kind of mafiosa, inadvertently in a sense, you know, because he would actually, you know, like he kind of didn't realise he was supporting his non-interested side. So the capos and everything sort of tried to destroy these buildings as quickly as they could, but basically the law came in, and then there was lawyers versus lawyers, and they were just battling it out. Our lawyer, who, you know, and you were reluctant to get a lawyer. I mean, it was costing, I don't know what it cost. I think we spent probably $20,000 on lawyers over that period. On the other hand, we went on rent strike against the capo, you know, so we didn't pay rent we owed them, we had back rent of $120,000 roughly, I suppose, by the time we did a deal. And that took, you know, we held out then for 5 years, I think, over the period. In the process, in the middle of this, I mean, 3 of the floors in my building were empty, and I needed sort of more space, you know. You know, we were utilising our 3,000 square foot to the max, and I was building sets for kind of TV and doing various bits and pieces, and I had a painting studio, and I opened up a floor. I cut a hole in the wall in the stairway, which had a little kind of flap system on it, and I went into the floor, and then from inside the place, I sealed the front doors and all that sort of stuff, and I built, you know, a very nice interior studio in there. And, you know, and I stored stuff, and, you know, I used it as a kind of a meeting room, and And at the same time, we were having this war with these gallery owners, these 2 mad girls who had a huge amount of money from their father, who was the editor of the New York Times earlier on. And they ran a gallery, but they were like crazy, you know, like basically conservative New England fascists is what we used to call them, and the Plum Sisters. And they hated us because they basically lived off the rest of the building's gas and all the free stuff, because they were so bloody tight with what they did. They wouldn't pay the bills, and if we didn't pay the bills, we'd all be cut off, right? And they didn't care about being cut off because they had about 3 places anyway. So they just kind of resisted. So we supported their kind of operation in the building, you know, and we'd put in the gas lines and all that sort of stuff, and they lived off us. And they were total bastards. But in the process of that, I had this kind of heating system. I built this interior heating system. It was gas-powered, gas-fired, hot air system, which is not totally recommended, but was cheap at the time. And that heated the whole place. And so I built it into this kind of system, and then I had a moisture system built in that was run by pot plants. And I was growing pot plants in this kind of interior room with grow lights, and that was creating a humidity thing. The humidity system that I was using 12 gallons of water a day into our space. Say between 6 and 12 gallons depending on the humidity. And it's the real problem in New York. You know, minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, let's say, or 0 Fahrenheit, minus 10 centigrade. We were looking at a huge amount of humidity had to be put back into the building. So I used pot to do it. And then, you know, I'd get these struggling trees, they'd all grow up, and they'd been water fed, you know, automatic water system, which was putting the water and the humidity into the thing, and these were putting out carbon dioxide. They were eating the carbon dioxide from the cycle of the heating system and putting it back in and creating oxygen, and we were using that in the building, in our floor. Anyway, the plants, you know, I'd get overgrown, I'd chop them down, they were like mold, you know, they would just keep growing like perennials, you know, and I'd pick a bit of pot off them, and, you know, it was terrible stuff. I mean, you know, it wasn't being grown per se for the pot. But then I did a gig for with this bunch of filmmakers. I was shooting a and production managing Crowded House Video for cash. And I was using the floor, my studio up in the 3,000 square foot, my legit space, for Crowded House production office, right? So I cleared everything out, including 3 or 4 of these pot plants, took them downstairs and installed them in my hidden room. Now the sisters picked up on this somehow or other, and they tipped off the landlords, because they were trying to do a deal to stay there with the landlords by being nice to them. They actually didn't have a lawyer, and they were living off the fact that we were actually fighting them, essentially, fighting this capo. So at the end of, right on the day, the final day of the shoot, I came home with bags of shopping and everything, walked into the opening of the door, you know, the regular door in the front of the place, and these guys were standing there with shotguns. Mr. Smith and his offsider. And they basically took me into they'd cut through the open space of my thing, and then they took me into the place, and, you know, like I'm sitting in my studio, and they've got the gun on me, and they're going to, first of all, they're going to shoot my legs out. I'll go back to the other shooting the legs out story if we actually get time later on, which is the kind of sex one. But this one they said, well, you know, we're going to basically kill you now, or we're going to maim you, you know, enough, you know, that you'll never do this again, and you'll all leave the building now, right? At this stage I had, you know, a small child and you know, and Betty, and was trying to run this whole sort of operation, and, you know, and we were just done the Crowded House thing, made a bit of money, and everything was looking pretty good. Anyway, the other guy's saying, don't shoot, you know, don't shoot him, you know, let's just put it into, you know, the police's hands, right? And these guys had so much power in the neighbourhood, they owned all the buildings anyway, right? First precinct is 2 blocks away from me, and that was the precinct where the princes of the city lived. They were the what they call you know, they were the I don't know whether you ever saw Prince of the City, the movie, but that was where they operated out of. They were basically a major, you know, gang of, you know, interlaced with the Mafia, drug dealing, you know, they were the drug program. They call them the princes. Anyway, so the guy said, listen, you know, we don't want to kill the guy, right? Let's just, you know, have him arrested. We'll arrest him for breaking and entering, and here's a couple of pot plants, right? We'll give them to the cops. And the other guy says, no, let's just shoot him. And he said, no, he's an Australian, you know, that's bloody dumb, mate. I mean, you know, like, so we'll give him a break. He's an Australian, he doesn't know any different, he doesn't realise who the fuck we are, and he's got no respect, and, you know, we'll treat him in it. But at the same time, because Australians are dumb and they don't know enough, and, you know, whatever they do is stupid business, we will, you know, we'll ease off. And the guy goes, oh, okay, right? So on their mobile, they ring the cops. They ring up this cop. Now the cops, they're to and froing on this thing, you know, and then it says, Mr. Ponte is preferring charges against this guy, this Australian guy, come over. So, you know, like 5 minutes later, the cops walk over from the precinct around the corner, and, you know, they shuffle into the place, and they're standing around, and there's a woman and there's 2 guys. And the woman's fairly young and looks pretty fresh off the block. And they say, well, you've got to deal with this. The capo guys say, the Mafia says, you've got to arrest this guy for breaking and entering. And they say, well, it's a civil matter. Oh, man, we don't want to get involved. This is bullshit, you know. And they said, well, they got pot plants here, you know, arrest them for growing pot, right? And the guy goes, oh, fuck, a couple of straggly looking plants like that, you know, I mean, it's a joke. Like, we don't even know, right? And the guy says, and he gets on the mobile, right? And he rings up the environmental corp, and then he hands the phone over to the cop. And the cop takes the call, you know, and he goes, yeah, okay, right. They shut the call down and they say, right, you're under arrest for breaking and entering and growing pot. Okay, so, and then they say, well, we'll give you 10 minutes to sort everything out, you know, and figure out what you're doing with your thing. So by this time, Betty's got lawyers on the phone. We've got a lawyer, and the lawyer says, go along with them, don't bugger anything up, right? And I'll have you out you know, in an hour, right? So I walk over with the cops to the thing, you know, no handcuffs, no nothing, just stroll along with them over to the first precinct. They put me into the jail. They give me a TV with the Mets game, which happens to be on, and I sit down there and I'm chatting with them and so on. And it's this kind of little cell. It never gets used much, first precinct there. It also has the whole horse thing there and everything. You know, they've got the stables next door, and it's kind of an archaic thing. And it's right next to the fire engine station where, you know, they do the Ghostbusters one, you know. So they've got the big Ghostbusters, you know, logos and everything hanging around, and, you know, it's the old, you know, everybody's kind of, it's TRIBECCA, it's kind of like community. It's, you know, so they're going, well, we like, you know, the cops going, listen, man, we just don't want to do this. We apologise. It's a load of shit. It will sort itself out, right? I say, fine, okay, no worries. And I've got the lawyers being sort of rung up, and, you know, we're getting things together. And so I sit down there, I start watching the Mets game in a cell, in about there's 2 little Mickey Mouse cells there. And, you know, about half an hour later, the phone rings. Just off the, you know, and there's a table across from the cell where a couple of cops have got a, you know, phone, you know, it's a bit, 2 cops are working on, one of which is this young woman. Anyway, she takes the call, right, and she goes, yeah, and then she hands the call over to the other cop, and they go, yeah, okay, yeah, and they nod a lot, and all this going on. I'm just watching out of the corner of my eye. I don't even know it's got anything to do. Anyway, they hang up on the phone. They walk over to the cell, you know, the TV's sitting outside the cell with the Mets game on, and they turn the TV off. And then they unplug the TV, and the TV goes out the door. Right, and I think, what the fuck's going on here, right? And, fine, okay, so, and they said, well, we've taken away, you're not allowed to have TV. Right, okay, fine, you know, like some silt sitting there. 10 minutes later, the phone rings back again. And then, virtually the same thing happens, except at this time the guy picks it up and he goes out and gets the woman. She comes back, and they've forced her to be the one who's responsible for doing the arrest, right? And they're pissed off, like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this arrest thing. Right, fill out the paperwork, right? They tell her, you got to fill out the fucking paperwork for this thing. So she goes, oh, okay, fuck it, you know, I'll do it. So she fills out the paperwork, or starts filling it out. She's asked me questions, you know, like, you know, what's your, you know, and I'm going through the thing. And then she gets another phone call, and it's some superior thing. Anyway, she's now got to go to court with me tomorrow, right? Which is her day off, which absolutely infuriates her, right? So she goes from sort of like being very friendly and, you know, all this sort of stuff, to absolutely almost homicidal within about 10 minutes. And she gets a nightstick and then just comes up and starts screaming at me and running her nightstick up and down the walls of the bars, right? I'm going, well, okay. So, well, you know, it's got nothing to do with me. I mean, you know, like the lawyer said I'd be out in an hour, you know, like, you know, get my lawyer on the phone, you know, here's the number, da-da-da-da-da. I've got it written on my arm. And then, you know, and, no, that's not going to do any good. No, it's got to happen. No, I'm being forced to do it, you know. Now I've got to come in from Jersey. I've got to come in and do this fucking thing with you. And she just goes ballistic, right? And then the male cop comes in and drags her out of the place. You know, calm down. She, you know, and she's screaming at me at the top of her voice through the thing, you know. Absolutely ballistic. And the male cop drags her out of the place, right? And we hear muffling, shouting, yelling up of the officers and da-da-da, and I'm going like, fuck, you know, don't have anything to do with me much, you know, and I'm going, okay, I'll be out soon and everything will calm down. But what's happening, of course, is that the capos keep upping the odds, right? And he's got some other senior policeman on the line, you know, and between the two of them, they keep pushing the buttons, right? And they're going to put me through the bloody griller. And at this stage, I think, you know, I don't think too much about it. So by this time it's like 10 o'clock at night, you know, and, you know, eventually the woman comes back. She's calmer, you know, she's having a cup of coffee, you know, the cops in there, they're all talking about it. There's people in and out, things are happening. And then suddenly they open the bloody cell up, right? They fucking come in, they grab me, they handcuff me up. And then they put the bloody baton through my handcuffs, right? It's the old baton trick through the handcuffs, right? And then they just go, right? Which is an extremely painful thing. I don't know whether you've ever had this, but with handcuffs behind your back, right? And then they put the baton through and they use it like a screwdriver in a piece of wire, right? So they can just go like that, and it's extremely painful on your wrists, It pulls you right to the ground. So I'm on my hands and knees now, right? And she's got the baton, right? So she's doing this, and the other two cops now are on my shoulders. So they take me outside the fucking place, and they put me in a car, in the back of a car, and banging me into everything on the way, like, oh shit. And every time, anything goes wrong, she does the old wind-up job. And I'm going like, what the fuck is going on now, And I said, I want to make a phone call. I've got to, like I'm trying to let them know I'm being removed. Anyway, we head to Central Booking. Now, Central Booking is downtown, right underneath Chinatown, about 10 blocks away from where we are. And that's where, they push through everybody in New York, sort of, that's, well, it's Central Booking. I mean, that's enough for it, basically. And they run the whole bloody thing. Anyway, so I arrived there. They bash me out of the place. They walk me up to the thing. They bang me into the bloody, to the doorways. I miss the door, They slam me all over the place. And they get me into the thing. And I go in, and then there's a kind of a whole bureaucracy that's sitting there. They take all your personal possessions, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I go into this cell, a huge cell. And there's 60 guys in there. And I'm the only white one. And most of them are there on drug charges of some sort or another. And there's some really heavy-looking dudes in there. Really heavy. And I'm the only white guy in the whole bloody place. And actually the lawyer before this has actually said, I'd actually just given up smoking just before this. For some, I'd given up smoking, and the lawyer said to me, he sent over, he said, here's 2 packs of cigarettes. And I said, I don't smoke anymore. He said, take them with you. Huh? Might be handy. So I put these 2 packs of bloody Marlboro or something in my pocket, and I thought nothing else about it. And I wasn't smoking anyway, and it was clean ass. And I get into the Central Booking, and they take all the possessions, including the cigarettes and everything else. At this moment, I'm in this very neat seersucker suit, which I've come off the bloody Crowded House set wearing, right? And which is, really good one. I sit down in this, I walk in, sit down, they take the handcuffs, they keep I had handcuffs on still. So that everybody's handcuffed in this big space, individually handcuffed, but there's maybe 50, 60 guys in there. And it's just benches all the way around, and there's a little kind of window where they do the admin, and they're doing the paperwork, and they call you over, and they figure out who you are, where you are, and put you in a kind of a thing, and then later on you go to another section, and then they vent you through that. So I'm sitting in there in the thing, and this guy, like totally out of it, fucking huge guy, comes over to me and says, "Give me your suit." And I said, well, first of all, I had my handcuffs, in front of me now, handcuffed, right? So I couldn't get a coat off if I wanted to. And he says, "I want your bloody suit." And it was, at that stage, I think it was virtually the hottest day that had ever been in New York. In fact, the next day was 111 degrees, I think, or something like that out in the street. It was really outrageous, of which we'll get to later on if we still have enough tape. But the guy says, "I want your bloody suit. I want your suit coat now. I'm cold. I'm coming off fucking, heroin." And he's shivering and shaking, and and he's like, demented, of which half the guys are either out of it or they're coming out of it. They're all in that kind of stage of, and the other half are dealers who may or may not be high. And some of whom are, you know, like 300 or 400 pounds, you know, we're talking fucking, you know, serious looking shit. And they're all looking at me, white boy, and they're giving me a bit of toast, you know, like, you know, you're a white boy there now, you know, yeah, what are you out here, you know, and you got a suit on. Anyway, the guy says, I want your suit. I say, I can't give it to you, I'm handcuffed. He says, go over to that guard and ask the guard to take your handcuffs off because you want to take off your suit. And I said, what the fuck, if I do this, man, you know, like, I'm going to be dead, you know, they're going to know I'm a fucking mark. I'll be just rolled over from now on out, right? But, you know, like, and I'm sitting around looking around to see if there's any support for me, any kind of, you know, humanity going on here, and there's not a fucking murmur, right? Nothing. At this moment, you know, like in the thing, so no, okay, then, so I go over to the guard and I say to the guard, I walk over there to the thing where the guard's standing at the door, and I say, listen, these guys want my fucking suit, you know, they want me to ask you to take my handcuffs off so I give up my suit and give it to them. And I'm just saying to you, you know, I don't want my handcuffs off, right? And so, you know, we have this conversation, which no one else is with me in. He goes, okay, no worries. And then totally, you know, like, he's black, big guy. I go back to the guy, right? And I say, I'm sorry, they won't do it. And the guy's saying, all right, if you don't take the suit off, I'll kill you. Okay. And I'm going like, you know, I mean, can he kill me, you know, in front of all these people? I don't know, right? So I say, yeah, and I sit down, right? And I'm holding, you know, the thing, and I'm looking around, and there's like, you're just edging in, everything looks like it's going to go off. At that moment, this bloody, the cell, they open it up, and they bring this white guy in. And he's 6'5", he's wearing a pair of fucking running shorts, you know, the ones like those really cut up the side ones, and he's got like a bodybuilder's t-shirt on, you know, they're kind of just a singlet, and he must be fucking 250, 300 pounds, he's a bodybuilder, right, but he's stoned out of his gourd, right, he's fucking totally stoned, and he sort of wanders there, he sort of looks around, and then he sees me, the only other white guy in the thing, and he comes over and sits down. And I've made space for him, like in a minute. And he sits down and he, you know, he's all smooth, but he's, you know, and I said, well, what the fuck, you know, and he says, I'm a truck driver, they, you know, arrested me nodded out at the wheel, you know, in Canal Street, right? And I tell him what's going on, you know, they want my suit, you know. And he goes, yeah, fuck man, you know, like, I don't know, but, you know, and then he starts talking, you know, he makes a little bit of space, you know, he's got a little bit of clout, but, you know, I don't know how much, you know, at that stage. Anyway, he says, go over to the guy and take the fucking suit off, you know, it's not worth fucking up. And I'm sitting here and nothing will go any further the next round, possibly, right? You know, you don't want to give in, but you don't want to not give in, right? This point. So I go, okay, fuck, I won't give in. Oh, I'll give in. I go over to the guy and I say, how are we doing?
I'll have to split in a few minutes.
Eh?
It's 2.
Oh yeah, fuck,
Yeah.
okay. Gee, we've only got halfway, it's shocking, isn't it?
Oh, you're almost at the end of the tape, actually.
Are we? Oh, Jesus, man, I'm too slow.
That's alright, it's
That's the
really
trouble.
good. We'll pick up the rest of it next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll do the rest of it and send it to you or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, the guy says to me, take your fucking... So I go over to the guard and I say, take my handcuffs off. Right? He goes, okay. Takes my handcuffs off. I take my suit coat off and I give it to this fucking guy. Fuck me if when I didn't get moved on, when the guy got moved on ahead of me, he gave me my fucking coat back and thanked me. You know, but by this time that whole about to be killed thing all kind of disintegrated, you know, and wove down. Then they took us out and tortured us. And maybe we'll run that as another chapter, and that was the torturing, not of just the cigarettes, but the heat torture. In 10 words or less, what they did was put 35 of us in a little van, and they went and parked it out on the street in the middle of Chinatown. Then they kind of lock all the doors on the van, which is running at, as I said, the street temperature was well over 100. And they left us there for 4 hours until they passed out, till virtually everyone in the van passed out. Fortunately, I was the last one chained up, in the row. They had 2 rows of 10 sitting in the back of a pickup truck size van, you know, square box prison van. They had 2 rows of people standing up, most of whom again are junkies or been, you know, are coming down, right? So then they start vibrating, throwing up. So they're throwing up all over the other people. There's 20 people in the van that should hold 10. And they leave them in there until they all go unconscious, right? They're banging, at one stage they're banging on the thing. The guys who have been there before say, don't do that, man, that's just going to infuriate them more. By this time the cops themselves are sitting over in a bar. I can see them out through the crack in the door, and I've got the crack in the door so I can stay conscious. Whereas the other one, all they run out of air. They just get carbon monoxide and people throwing up on them. And the guys collapse. So this 300-pound guy standing up collapses on me, just goes unconscious. And I'm holding this weight there, but I've got my hand, you know, and this is the removal of us out of central booking, which took from, say, 4 o'clock in the morning by now through to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then we're put on the street for 4 hours, right? And this is the part of the torture program, and we're parked outside the Tombs. The Tombs was the huge edifice on the edge of Chinatown that they condemned in the riots of 77, you know, as being inhumane to people. But it's the feeder to the court system. So they just put us in these little trucks and park us out on the street, lock them up, and walk over to the bar and sit down and have a fucking beer in the window of the bar for 2 to 3 hours, you know, until everybody's gone unconscious in the truck. Or some of them are banging, you know, the ones that are naive bang, and the guys say, don't bang, because it's just going to make it longer, you know. And they've been through it before. And these guys, you know, still they're frustrated, they're banging, then they kind of slowly, you know, and it's like they all kind of lose their oxygen and they all wind down. I'm just huddled in the corner. Again, pretty much, I know there was a Chinese guy by that time in there as well, who fucking doesn't know what's going on. He's just like fucking shaking the whole time, you know. And he's become the persecuted one, you know, like he's gone further down the rung than me. And then they take us back into the Tombs. I'll just wrap this up really quickly. And they give us back our personal effects. And then they make us stand, turn around, put our personal effects on the floor, which I've got 2 packets of cigarettes and a lighter, right? And when we turn around, we've got all of our cigarettes, everything's back, all our personal possessions, except throughout the whole prison, that whole group coming in, who are now throwing up, they're sick, they're shitty, they're all over, there's fucking people they've been shitting themselves. And there's no cigarette lighters there. But when they put us in the cells, no one realises this. So they start bartering everything they can for cigarettes. Everyone's mad for a smoke, right? And so they all barter, I start, you know, and I'm looking really good now because I've got a couple of packets of smokes and I'm not smoking. And I relieve one of them, you know. No one can see what anyone else has got because they turn them around. Made you put your personal effects in an envelope. All this is really crucial. Personal effects in an envelope, turn around, face the wall. And then what they've done is go along and they've taken all the lighters and matches off everyone. In fact, they've even left a lighter or 2 there that doesn't work. Speaking of which, now I'm smoking again, Chris. And what they've done then is they've taken all the cigarette lighters, everybody goes in there, barters like hell. Then they all suddenly realise that no one can get a light. Then slowly up and down in front of these open cells, this row of cells, walks the guard, smoking a smoke. Lights it, sucks on it with the, you know, like absolutely sensual, you know, big black guard again. And, you know, and the guys who know what's going on now, you know, like, CO, which is corrections officer, right? CO, give us a light, you know, and they're calling, everyone's calling, CO. And these guys, they wander up to about 3 feet away from the cells and they're languidly, sucking on their smokes. Everyone, you know, by this time they haven't had a cigarette, you know, all these people haven't had a cigarette for fucking 5 hours, 6 hours, you know, 7 hours maybe. And they're going loopy, right? And they've already traded all their fucking pieces of horrible bread with dry cheese in them that completely, and we've got 20 people in this cell. The Chinese guy's just in the corner fucking vibrating still, you know, and everybody's threatening to kill him, you know, with, you know, anything sort of gesture comes up. And, you know, there's like people that have to sit on the toilet, it's fucking, there's shit everywhere. Everyone's gone in to have a shit. You know, it's the most disgusting environment you could possibly imagine. And there's a row, and everybody's jammed out, and nobody's got a seat, except this main man who's been there 100 times before, the biggest dealer on the thing, who's telling us what's going on, and what not to do and what to do, and he has the whole bloody seat, and he's lying down on it. And everybody else is like crowded or standing up, you know. I discovered that lying under the bench turns out to be the best kind of move, with my head right at the door. But it takes a while for that to kind of get sorted. But we're winding up now. What the CEO does anyway, about half an hour he goes and gives them a cigarette. He goes and lights it with a cigarette. The guy gets the fucking light. Everybody smokes like mad, right? And then 10 minutes later, anybody got a light? And it all starts again. And that was the cycle of... Eventually they get me out. But it takes 24 hours. Oh, I was fucking near dead. I was just so happy to be alive. Can't tell you.